Catherine,
Yeah, Martin.
you know that enough studies anyways, suggest that wine improves cardiovascular health.
Yeah.
In fact, after a full bottle of wine, you can hear the blood flow in your veins if you listen very closely.
Hmm.
With no reaction? Come on, I thought that was pretty good.
You can hear the blood flow in your veins if you
Yeah,
listen
if you
very.
listen very closely. Very close.
Oh, very closely.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, that one didn't flow so well. Oh yeah.
We've been out of practice, but
We have been out of practice.
but that's all right. So listeners, you just heard the dulcet voice and the the attempt at a joke from the one and only Martin Reyes, master of wine and dad joke stylist. And you know what that means? That means this is a special episode.
Yes, it's good to be back, Catherine. And I wish I could have joined you in London. Alas, duty called. I have to go to Mexico shortly to judge some wines there, and we got to balance work and travel and kids, who I love so much. But balance, moderation. If I had foreshadowing music, I'd cue it right now.
Yes, balance and moderation. I'm excited to talk about those things. It's exciting to have you back, my friend. And as our listeners know, these past few months, when Martin Reyes, Master of Wine, stops in at the Four Top Studios, we have wine and health in mind. So we've had quite a few of these discussions on the Four Top, right, Martin?
Yeah, let's list some of these episodes so that our listeners can go back if they like. Maybe when you do dishes or you fold laundry, you can listen to some of these back episodes. But
Mm-hmm.
back in episode 130, we covered the adoption of health warning labels on alcohol across nations around the world. And then in episode 134, we had a lively discussion about the World Health Organization's blanket declaration that no amount of alcohol is safe. Okay, I was fired up back then, and I kind of still am, but my fire has evolved a little bit.
Ooh, I'm excited to talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, and in episode 142, we had two doctors, Laura Catena and Miles Hassel. They joined us to talk about some serious holes in the WHO's claims. And then in episodes 148 and 149, we pretended that we were alcohol molecules and traveled through the human body. That was pretty fun.
That was the magic school bus theme. But I just want to remind our listeners about the important message here, no matter what, which is alcohol can be a toxin or a tonic. It entirely depends on the dose and the pace. So, alcohol abuse is toxic. We're not in favor of overconsumption, but we are in favor of wine with food in moderation. And that, in part, is what we want to talk a little bit more about today with our special guests.
Yes, and I will introduce the first of our very special guests in a second here. But Martin, I think we need to print up some T-shirts. Alcohol can be a toxin or a tonic. It entirely depends on the dose and the pace. That is Martin Reyes's trademark phrase. So yes, the Four Top is not in favor of alcohol abuse
No, it's
by
not.
any means. But let's talk about moderation with an expert, my friend Maria Ponzi, who is not only the director of Linfield College's Center for Wine Education, but is also the author of the book Pinot Girl. She's the former owner, chief executive, and president of Ponzi Vineyards. And significantly for this conversation, she is the creator of the 4-ounce pour. This is a keynote that we will hear more about shortly.
Yes, and we are also joined by a familiar face for me, Jason Haas. Jason is, like Maria, a second-generation wine grower who has carved out his own path, leading Tablas Creek Vineyard in Paso Robles. Jason is also an in-demand speaker and writer on many subjects, including real deal, legit, sustainable wine growing. And recently, he's turned his attention to wine and health. So I'm very excited, Jason, to talk wine and health with you. Welcome.
Thanks, Martin. I'm looking forward to it.
And welcome, Maria.
It's great to be with you all. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Catherine, it's all you.
Well, it's hard to know where to begin this conversation, but since our last episode, we've had so much information coming in. And one of the things we've been hearing is that young people are not drinking as much wine. They're not as interested in wine. And this is due to health concerns, warnings about wine and health. So, Maria, as the director of Linfield University's Center for Wine Education, are you hearing from young people that they're less interested in wine? Is this a problem that you're seeing at the university level?
Yeah, I've only been in this role for about 6 months, so I'm still getting down into, the classrooms to really talk to the students. But when I did speak to a few of them about this, I'm kind of getting this same response over and over and over again consistently, which is they don't see the difference between wine and any other alcohol.
Hmm.
So they are, to your point, they're really seeing alcohol as a negative thing. It is the same as anything else that you're drinking out there that has the toxins in it. And they have been told to stay away. They've been told that any amount is going to be harmful. What we also are learning about the young generation and wine is that really they feel that it's directed to an older demographic. They still feel that this is something that it's for their parents, it's for older people, it's a luxury item, it's very complicated, and it's not approachable. It's not approachable because it seems very complex to them, and also the cost of wine. The days of the $50, $55 and beyond is really just out of reach for young people today. And so they're looking for other options, and certainly, grabbing a bottle of tequila that's going to last, maybe a month versus one bottle of Pinot Noir that will last a couple, 3 days. But we have to kind of change the perception of it completely. And I think we really haven't talked to this generation about the positive health aspects of wine. Most of these folks are new to this whole concept of alcohol. And what they're hearing is, stay away. So we have an issue.
That point of staying away, it sounds like the WHO's declaration is having an impact faster than what some sanguine reactions had. I was fearful from the very moment I heard it, which is why I dove into it. Jason, you have been an outspoken critic of that declaration from the WHO. Has anything changed since you wrote that influential blog post?
I don't think anything has changed. I think the only thing that has changed is that maybe more people within the world of wine have realized the threat that this is. And I think the wine community has started to mobilize to come up with a response. Because when I wrote this, it was late last year. It wasn't that long ago. It was less than a year ago.
Yeah, exactly.
And the responses that I got were mostly, "Oh man, I had no idea."
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're now starting to see organizations like the California Wine Institute, like Wine America, like some of the Napa Valley Vintner, some of the larger regional and advocacy organizations start to come up with some strategies to try to create a different narrative. But no, I think if anything, people are seeing this steady drip of all alcohol is bad sorts of messaging in more and more mainstream publications. So no, I don't think anything significant has changed, except that maybe we're no longer quite in the starting gates as a community the way that we were.
Well, it seems to me that it's been daily too. It's almost like every 3 days there's something, you can find some kind of negativity about alcohol and wine. So it's, even though it started, it's been a couple of years now, right? Almost. It seems like there's an acceleration for me from where I'm sitting that is just, we keep getting hit. We keep getting hit with the negative.
It's interesting what I'm hearing because both of you mentioned this inability for young folks and certain consumers to distinguish between wine and other beverages. And those of us in the wine industry would argue that wine is a healthier option if you are going to indulge in alcohol. And so one thing that's been coming up in some of these articles is the proposal that nutrition labels be added to alcoholic beverages. And I'm wondering, would that be a good thing for wine? Because here we have this product that's really just grapes, right? How do you feel about the possibility of nutrition labeling being added to wine?
I think that there would be a number of benefits to it, in that you could show kind of the purity of what goes into most wines. It's a product which is made from fruit. At the moment, you can't say anything that implies that there's anything healthy about it. You cannot put nutrient information on a on a wine label. You're prohibited from doing so, talking about anything that might imply that any alcohol is healthy. So if that breaks down that particular prohibition, I could imagine it being beneficial. But I'm honestly a little skeptical that we should be fighting this battle on health grounds at all.
Dig into that a little bit more, Jason.
Yeah, so I think if you dig into the studies of wine and health, and certainly of alcohol and health, you get a range of impacts, many of them negative, some of them positive. A lot of it gets tied up in not just do you drink wine, but what is your consumption? What is the frequency of your consumption? How often do you overconsume? How often do you binge drink? I mean, you end up getting bogged down in details of levels of harm instead of talking about the magic of wine, the ability that it has to bring people together and to combat loneliness and to encourage interaction. The fact that wine is so tied into agriculture and history, that it has ties to geology, to population migration, to all sorts of things that are outside of the realm of wine and health specifically, but are positive impacts of wine. So I think somehow talking about like, well, it's healthful in this way, probably it's harmful in this way, probably we're sort of fighting this battle on kind of our opponent's chosen territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, though, Jason, I totally agree with you. I think that at the same time that in terms of the nutritional labeling, I think that it would be a good thing to disclose the fact that this is a beverage that comes from the earth and that it is, as you mentioned, it's pure. It's coming from fruit. I think there's just this overall lack of understanding about what wine is. And again, as I mentioned before, in contrast to perhaps spirits and beer. And I think that the alcohol industry in general has not done a fair enough job in just really educating our public, our society, our culture on alcohol in general and how it can be a part of your life. And that's where I come from, is like it's how we live our life and how we treat things in our life, how we connect with things in our lives. Everybody here is very immersed in wine and the culture of wine, and that is something that most people in our country, in particular in the United States, I think they really just don't understand what that means. To your point, we believe that wine brings people together, right? We believe that it's a connector. We believe that it's food. We believe that it's healthy when it's approached in moderation with appreciation. But I think that this is unfortunately not known outside our walls.
Maria, you touched on something right now that I want to expand upon a little bit that really resonated with me. Backing up for a second, when you said wine comes from fruit, right? And when we talked about the science of alcohol, the molecule, and its effect on our body, something Catherine said, hang on, she said, you're telling me that there is an enzyme in our bodies that is two enzymes actually that are specifically designed to metabolize alcohol in from nature. And I said, yeah, that's because we fruits that are on the ground they've been laying there for a while. We're foragers, right? We've been around alcohol low levels for millennia.
Yeah.
And that resonated with, like, we take our cues from nature, right? That's a safe bet. People who are into health and holistic digestion and nutrition, it resonates with us when highly processed foods and drinks are not good for us because, right, they're basically artificial.
Yeah.
The foods that are natural, less processed, we innately feel that it's right to consume them. Fermentation was and is a natural result of fruit laying around, right? As I mentioned, but at a low level, that's modest quantities, which is why pace matters, right?
Yeah.
That's why I want to highlight what you have done. Tell us more about the 4-ounce pour.
Well, really, it all came to me after the sale of our family's winery, which was back in 21. And I was thinking, gosh, I've had this whole life of wine since I was literally a toddler. Since I was like 4 years old, I've been around wine. And I wanted to come from that with something else beyond, like, I know how to run a winery. Like, what about it? How does that impact life? What about it? When I was really deeply diving into this whole thing, I really realized that, from my little viewpoint, I always saw wine on the table. It was on the table with the bread and the salad and the salt and pepper shaker and the meal. My folks were not using, and I did say using, they were not using wine as a cocktail. They were instead enjoying it slowly with deep appreciation because we were our whole purpose in moving to Oregon was to create beautiful Pinot Noir. That's why we moved out of California to the North Willamette Valley. I mean, it was very intentional. So they were never tossing about wine. They were never just taking it for granted. It was something very precious, and it was to be respected and revered. And I think that is what I saw, and I observed over my life as a young person. And then on top of that, I started thinking about, as winemakers, as producers of wine, the kind of intention that is put into making a bottle of wine. If you're doing it in the right way, I would say right way, being in an artisan kind of way and being very authentic with the fruit that you have and treating it respectfully. It takes many, many years, as we all know, to make a great bottle of wine. And so what I'm trying to demonstrate in the 4-ounce pour is this concept of slowing down, being more mindful, and just being more intentional with everything that we do in our lives. So from eating and drinking to how we spend our days, our everyday habits. And I felt this was an important point to bring across, because in the American culture, in our culture in this country, we are living in, hyperspeed. And we live in a place where we have a really strong issue and an attraction almost for excess and overconsumption. And that's kind of our baseline. The more the better, right? The more the biggest, the biggest house, the best job, running a marathon as opposed to just walking, down the street, going for a nice little hike. I mean, we are just excessive kind of overconsumptive kind of people. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I think it's very important to slow down with everything that we do, and really to spend more time in appreciation. And so that's why I came up with the 4-ounce pour, because I believe that 4 ounces of wine in your glass is actually just perfect because it forces you to really focus on the wine. It doesn't mean you can't go back and have another 4 ounces, with food, but it does force you to slow down. And if you really think about that, what's our typical, glass pour? Typically it's 8 ounces, right? And they pour it right up to the top. Yeah. You're like, oh my God, slow down. So that's what it's about, and gets right back to what you're talking about, Martina, about moderation and having balance. And I think it can be applied with wine, but really across our entire way of life.
This resonates with me when I just got a new hand levered espresso machine, and it's designed for like massive double shot espressos. Like, wait, what I thought when I went to visit my wineries in Europe, like they're small. They're like small, like Italian espressos. They're like 7 grams as opposed to 18 grams. I'm like, whoa, the Americans have just defaulted to double shots of excess caffeine. And I'm like, what happened to that small little bit?
It's really true. I mean, another example, this is kind of a simple one, but if you're ever in Italy, right, and you ask for a coffee to go, like your espresso to go, they look at you like you're nuts, right?
Yeah.
You're like, what are you doing? Because your espresso, right, is in a beautiful little cup and a saucer,
I once did that. I was going on a hike and I was begging for it. So they just gave me a ceramic cup with tinfoil over it. And they just said, bring it back later. We don't have paper cups here. It was so great.
But I love that they just don't do that. It's the very intention. There's intention to that. They're like, no, man, you slow down. Sit your ass down and stand at the bar and take a minute to enjoy this beautiful little tiny amount of beverage. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Maria, I wanted to follow up on something you said because it resonated with what I think I'm sort of hearing a recurring theme in this conversation, which is we do need as wine to kind of differentiate ourselves from other categories of alcohol. And the amazing journalist Felicity Carter has written about the kind of this new temperance movement and a lot of the messaging that's coming out. It's referring to quote unquote big alcohol. Wine is such an interesting category, such an interesting industry because it is so fragmented. It is so many tiny family owned brands who are, like you said, working by hand. This is a farm product, it's a local product. And that is really the difference. We are not big alcohol.
Right.
We're not proponents of it being consumed in a big way.
Right.
Wine is different. It's local. It's small. Jason, I wanted to pull you in on this. We got the Italian perspective from Maria, and I know that you're making more French style wine. So we want to hear from you.
So I love all of this. I mean, I wrote a blog like a year and a half ago when I was just horrified to see hard seltzer blowing up as a category and
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about how pure it was,
Right.
that it was gluten free and
Mm.
low calorie. And I was like, man, if wine can't win at this thing against an industrial product that's been around for 15 minutes, like if it can't win on authenticity there, like, whew, we got problems. But
Mm.
I think what you're getting at is absolutely right. I mean, wine comes from a specific place in a way that beer doesn't, a way that spirits mostly don't.
Yeah.
And people are used to understanding that the choices that you make in a vineyard have consequences in the wine that results. And so it's much less of a leap for people. And I often think of this in terms of the value that wine can bring to a discussion like on regenerative farming, which is something else that we've pioneered at Tablas Creek, where like it's great that there are thousands of acres of regenerative organic certified cotton, but does that actually make a better shirt? I don't know. It's better for the world. It's something to support, but it's maybe a little harder to translate into the end product. Whereas with wine, you can talk about the practices that you do, the things that you do not do, and people understand that that has an impact on the final beverage that they consume. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's equally relevant in this discussion about wine and health because it is in many ways it is one of the purest of alcoholic beverages because it does come from a fruit from a place. You can trace it all the way back to the farmer, and I feel like that gives us the ability to have a discussion that maybe other forms of alcohol would struggle with.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's so true, Jason. And I think that we know all these things because we live in the world of wine. But how do we get that out to the masses who are still drinking, sorry, but a Diet Coke with dinner or a coffee? So
And
I think that that is something that our industry really needs to start, talking about is just exactly what you said, Jason, is like, how are we different?
and this is an area where I feel like maybe our scale is working against us because you think even the largest wineries are really small compared to
Tiny.
say
Yeah, they're tiny.
like
Mhm.
Michelob Ultra. They can do national ad campaigns for like this is the beer for after you've completed your half marathon.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
so it feels like in many cases the battle, partly because we as an industry are prohibited from making any health claims by federal
Mm.
law, but partly because of our scale, it feels like this is a battle that really maybe needs to be waged by some of those larger organizations, by the wine institutes of the world, by groups that can aggregate the funding and the reach of hundreds or thousands of us little wineries.
Mhm. Yeah.
I know talking about kind of that magic of wine response where you talk about its connection to farming, its connection to history, its connection to local economy, the fact that a bottle of wine is of a volume that is meant to be shared. It's something which is not an isolating beverage. It's a beverage that brings people together, and that there is a an epidemic of disconnection and social loneliness
Mhm.
that this can help be a part of addressing. I think it's that which will be the right choice, not on well, let's point to this bit of cardiovascular health, which invites the response that says, well, there's also that negative on cancer rates. And then all of a sudden you're talking about heart attacks and cancer instead of talking about this amazing beverage that people have enjoyed together for 10,000 years. So I don't know the answer to it, but my suspicion is that it will trend in the direction of the things which make wine special, not in picking apart this particular health claim or that particular health claim.
Here's the deal. I think that this argument has been going on for hello, how long? For a
Yeah.
century, right? I mean, there's always been the anti-alcohol and the temperance movement and all these things that we're now dealing with again. And I don't think we'll ever win everyone over, and nor should we, right? Because there are some people who just, their bodies are not going to perform well with alcohol. Okay, fine. But I think what we need to do is try to at least have some kind of impact in this younger generation, if nothing else, that's coming into this world with this really negative message on wine and frankly alcohol in general. So I think as an industry we need to figure out how we're going to present this in all the ways that Jason is so eloquently noting, that we are the people who connect people. We are going to, create community. And perhaps that's something that starts to resonate with younger people who, had to deal with the pandemic in a far, I don't know, for me, just a deeper way than I think those of us who are much older, So I think that wine in particular has an incredible opportunity right now. I have to say that I personally have been disappointed in the lack of the industry coming in and saying, hold on, here's all the things that we are. I feel like we are so insulated. And it goes back to the young man who told me, it's a luxury item. You
Mhm.
guys are talking to me. You're talking to somebody else. And we need to start talking to other people about wine and trying to get them to get excited about it and really showing how it can be a fun thing, that wine is not just luxury and it's not pretentious and it's not all those things, but it's having fun together
Mhm.
and it's sharing and all those things that we know. And I think we're going to start to see some of that, but we need to do more of it. We need to break it down because we haven't said anything really positive about wine since 1991 when the French paradox came out, right? And everyone was like Mediterranean diet and red wine. And we were all like, woo, look at the wine sales. And then what? Nothing. Crickets. We've all been kind of riding on this wave thinking, we're good, but we're not. We haven't done our work.
I was just kind of thinking, I was like, wine doesn't have to be good for you. Maybe the argument isn't that wine is good for your health. I was thinking, like, what is something that I like to treat myself with that I get it every once in a while and don't think about health? And I was like, macarons. I love macarons. And it's like, it's a treat, but
Yeah.
typically you wouldn't sit down and eat
I
them
know
by
you're talking
yourself. You would share them
about.
with friends. It's a little bit of a splurge, but it brings joy to,
Mhm.
like, if you have dinner with friends and you bring out some macarons, everyone smiles
Mhm.
and it brings joy. And so maybe we need to start thinking about positioning wine not as like, well,
Mhm.
this is good for your health. No, it's not really actually good for your health. I
Mhm.
mean, that's debatable, but joy is good for your health. Joy
I,
is
I,
good for you.
I love that framing of the discussion, and I think it's absolutely right. I mean, I think our message on health, if we have one, is that wine in moderation is not going to have really any measurable impact on your health. And that was one of the conclusions that I came to when I dug into the research, is that the probably very slightly decreased mortality over a long time is you're talking about like tenths or hundredths of percentage points in changes. And yet the ability to give pleasure and to bring people together is massive. So I feel
Hmm.
like we've got a couple of messages that we want to be getting out as an industry. One is that we are in support of moderation, that moderation is a way to significantly add to your quality of life without making sacrifices to your health. And we need to be encouraging the organizations that represent us to push back on any sort of government recommendations that lump together excess consumption and moderate consumption, because that's I think where
Hmm.
it's scary. I mean, nobody is questioning that overconsumption of alcohol isn't dangerous. Absolutely it is. It has all sorts of negative health and societal impacts, but we don't want to be like the baby that gets thrown out with the bathwater. We want to show that we are in support of moderation, that our organizations that represent us can push back on the misinformation and the attempt to pull that together, and we can focus on promoting the joy.
We have been unfairly compared to tobacco, big alcohol, right? For many reasons, that is a false comparison. But if I were to put myself in tobacco's shoes years ago when that whole thing was going down and been asked how to defend the tobacco industry, I'm just pretending here, right? I would have said, listening to what both of you have just mentioned, could the idea be that you highlight a story of a family tobacco farm grower and talk about, I don't know, smoking in moderation? You get my point, right? Where even that might be able to humanize something as emphatically unhealthy, unequivocally unhealthy as smoking cigarettes. Bringing that back now to this, instead of necessarily combating head to head the health risks and benefits and so forth, then maybe the power of the story of the producer who's a farmer, who's creating a product, crafting it over the course of time and patience, and then the people who get to enjoy that libation, that snapshot in time, that the power, the power of the story, the natural conclusion of that harvest, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years later, with their loved ones, with the cuisine, considering what you're eating, considering who you're having it with, and just lingering into the evening
Mhm.
with wine.
Mhm.
Does the health benefit or risk matter at that point? I don't know.
And I think we have good reason to show that the health benefits and risks of moderate consumption are, like, the changes in your expected health outcomes are pretty negligible. So when you
Right.
put it in that kind of framing, I think it's a really good way to think about it. I think it's also worth thinking about it from kind of what does wine bring
Mhm.
to the American economy. I mean, there was an economic impact study that measured the value of the American wine industry to the American economy as over $276 billion a year and over 1.84 million jobs. And that's a pretty massive contribution. It's $1,000 for roughly $1,000 for every person who lives in the United States. It's a major piece of our society and the benefits that flow from that. And I think if we can contrast that and the joy and the connection with people and the connection with history, you're right. The negligible differences in health outcomes look pretty small.
I appreciate that, Jason. I think I want to get back to what Martin was illustrating there is this sense of togetherness and connection, because that's not health in the way that we think of health,
Right.
but it is health. It is life health, because the more you are with people, with community, with family, friends, connecting, laughing, showing joy, having joy, that extends your life. It's as important as exercise and a clean diet and all the things that we know that we need, but we don't talk enough about that. And it kind of gets back to, my 4 ounce pour concept of coming back together and being at the table together. And actually, when I do this keynote, I ask people, how are you going to change your lives? And you know how many? I can tell you 7 out of 10 of the comment cards I get are people saying, I've decided that I'm going to sit down with my husband for dinner. I've decided that I'm going to sit down at the table and have dinner with my children. And it blows my mind, because it's like, are you not doing that?
Right.
Are you not connecting with your most cherished people in your life?
Hmm.
Wine creates that. It forces you in a beautiful, elegant way to sit and enjoy food, and each other and conversation and all these things. And so, yes, I think that's health, but it's in a different version of health that we don't really pay attention to. We don't think about it. We forget these daily, everyday moments that should be a part of everyone's life, Anyway.
I love that thought to wrap on, Maria. You got me thinking about what am I going to cook my daughter for dinner? And of course, I'll be opening a bottle of wine for myself. Thank you for joining us, Maria Ponzi, director of Linfield University's Center for Wine Education, author of the book Pinot Girl, creator of the 4-Ounce Pour, so many other things. Maria, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And Jason, my friend, thank you for joining us as well. Jason is also a second-generation wine grower who's a leader and champion of good vibe feelings around Tablas Creek Vineyard in Paso Robles. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks to you, and thank you to Catherine for having this be a focus. I think it's a really important thing for us to be talking about as a wine community.
Well, with that, this has been the Four Top Podcast. I am our executive producer, Catherine Cole.
And I am our occasional co-host, Martin Reyes, coming to you semi-live from Berkeley, California.
Nick Toole is our producer. Ruby Welkovich is our media and design manager.
Keelan King is our sound supervisor and the composer and performer of our fantastic theme music. Please visit our website, thefourtop.org, to learn more about us, listen to back episodes, and learn how to sponsor our work.
That's right. And if you have not already subscribed to The Four Top on iTunes or Spotify or your favorite podcast platform, please do so, and please leave us a rating.
From the depths of your liver, this is Martin signing off. Did I just say that?
And from the mouthpiece of the big alcohol lobby, this is Catherine signing off. Stay safe out there, guys, and thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.